At Christmas dinner, my mother-in-law raised her glass and told the entire family I was a disappointment. As I sat there, fighting back tears, my 8-year-old son stood up on his chair. "Grandma," he asked, his voice full of innocent curiosity, "is this the secret Daddy told you not to tell anyone?" Before we get to that Christmas dinner, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for our daily stories. Okay, let's set the scene. The air in my in-laws' dining room was always thick with the scent of my mother-in-law, Judith's expensive perfume, and a quiet, unspoken judgment. Christmas dinner was her grand performance, and this year was no exception. The table was a work of art, groaning under the weight of a perfectly roasted turkey, a dozen side dishes, and the heavy, oppressive weight of family expectation. I was feeling particularly fragile this year. 2 months prior, the marketing firm where I had worked for a decade had downsized, and my position was eliminated. Losing my job had been a significant blow, not just to my finances, but to my confidence. And I knew with a sinking certainty that my mother-in-law, a woman who measured a person's worth by their professional success, would see my current vulnerability not as a reason for compassion, but as an opportunity to attack. My husband, Mark, had been less than supportive. He was a man who lived his life in the shadow of his formidable mother, and her approval was the sun he orbited. My job loss was, in his eyes, an embarrassment that reflected poorly on him. "Just try not to bring it up, Izzy," he had whispered to me as we walked through their front door. "Let's just have a nice, peaceful Christmas." I sat at the long, polished table, a polite, fixed smile on my face, trying to be invisible. My 8-year-old son, Oliver, sat beside me, his eyes wide with the magic of the holiday, blissfully unaware of the adult currents of tension in the room. The dinner proceeded as it always did, a carefully orchestrated performance of a perfect, happy family. And then, as the dessert was being served, my mother-in-law stood up, a wine glass in her hand, to make her traditional Christmas toast. She started with the usual platitudes, thanking everyone for being there, praising her son Mark for his recent promotion at his law firm. Then her sharp, cold eyes found me across the table. "As we look towards the new year," she began, her voice a silken, condescending purr, "it is a time for all of us to reflect on our achievements and on the importance of making good, strong choices in life." She took a delicate sip of her wine. "It is so important to contribute to the family, to be a partner of equal standing, to not be a burden." The insult was so direct, so public, it was like a slap in the face. The other family members at the table, Mark's aunts, his cousins, all suddenly found a renewed, intense interest in their slices of pumpkin pie. "And so," she concluded, her gaze still fixed on me, a small, cruel smile on her lips, "we just hope that in the coming year, some of us can learn to be less of a disappointment to this family, to us all. Merry Christmas." The words hung in the air, a poison dart that had found its mark. I could feel the hot, humiliating tears welling up in my eyes. I looked across the table at my husband, my last hope, my partner. He would not meet my gaze. He just stared down at his wine glass, his silence a deafening act of complicity. He had chosen his mother. He had chosen to let me be sacrificed. I sat there, completely paralyzed by shame, my heart a shattered wreck. I was about to murmur an excuse, to flee the table and the room and the house, but then I felt a small, determined tug on the sleeve of my sweater. I looked down. It was my son, Oliver. He was looking up at me, his own face a mask of confusion, seeing the tears in my eyes. Then he looked across the table, at his grandmother, who was now sitting with a look of smug, victorious satisfaction. He did not understand the adult cruelty, the layers of subtext. He only understood a simple, powerful, and childlike equation. That woman had just made his mother cry. He put his small hand on my arm. Then he did something I will never forget. He stood up on his dining room chair,
a small 8-year-old boy in a Christmas sweater, trying to make himself tall enough for the whole table to see him. The room, which had been full of an awkward, shuffling silence, now went completely still. Every eye was on him. The battle I was too broken to fight, the war for my own dignity that I had just lost, was about to be taken over by the most unlikely and most powerful champion in the entire world. I sat there at that long, polished dining table, a prisoner in a cage of my own humiliation. The sound of my mother-in-law, Judith's, cruel words echoed in the silent room, each syllable a fresh, hot sting of shame. I could feel the pitying, awkward glances of the other family members and the cold, dismissive silence of my own husband, Mark. I was alone, a ship sinking in a silent, hostile sea. And then I felt a small, determined tug on my sleeve. I looked down, and my 8-year-old son, Oliver, was looking up at me. His face was a mask of pure, childlike confusion. He had seen my tears, he had heard the ugly tone in his grandmother's voice, and he had, in his simple, beautifully uncomplicated way, connected the two. He stood up on his chair. The movement was so unexpected, so out of place in the tense, formal atmosphere of that dinner, that it acted as a reset button. Every eye at the table, which had been so carefully avoiding me, now swiveled to look at the small boy in the Christmas sweater, who was now standing, a little unsteadily on the plush velvet of his dining chair. "Oliver, sit down," my husband, Mark, hissed, his face flushing with a new kind of embarrassment. But Oliver ignored him. His gaze was fixed, with a look of intense and serious curiosity, on his grandmother at the other end of the table. "Grandma?" he asked, his small, clear voice cutting through the thick, uncomfortable silence. Judith, who had been basking in the glow of her own verbal victory, looked at him, her expression one of pure, undisguised annoyance at having her moment interrupted. "What is it, Oliver?" she asked, her voice sharp and impatient. "Do you have something you wish to say?" "Yes," he said, nodding seriously. He then asked a question of such profound and devastating innocence that it seemed to suck all the air from the room. "Why are you being so mean to Mommy? Is it because of the big secret?" The word secret hung in the air, a dangerous, shimmering thing. I saw my husband, Mark, freeze, his wineglass halfway to his lips. I saw my mother-in-law, Judith, confident and cruel smile begin to falter. What secret are you talking about, Oliver?" Judith asked, her voice now a low, dangerous whisper. And then my son, my sweet, innocent, and unknowingly brilliant son, delivered the final, catastrophic blow. He was not being malicious. He was not being vengeful. He was simply an 8-year-old boy, repeating the strange, confusing words he had overheard between the two adults he trusted most in the world, trying to make sense of them. "The secret," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to remember the words correctly. "The secret that Daddy told you in the study yesterday? The one he said was just for you and him and not to tell anyone? The one about how," he paused, his voice full of a child's genuine curiosity, "how you're going to give him my college money so he can leave Mommy and find a better wife because Mommy lost her job and is a disappointment now?" The silence that followed was not like any silence I have ever known. It was not empty. It was a physical, crushing presence. It was the sound of a bomb detonating in a vacuum. It was the sound of a family's entire, carefully constructed world being turned, in an instant, to ash. I watched as the color drained from my husband's face, leaving it a waxy, greenish-white mask of pure, abject terror. I watched as my mother-in-law's face, which had been so full of smug, righteous pride, crumpled in on itself, her skin turning a deep, blotchy, and horrified shade of red. The other family members just stared, their mouths agape, their minds clearly struggling to process the monstrous, unbelievable truth that had just been so casually, so innocently, and so completely revealed. And Oliver, my sweet Oliver, just looked around at the silent, horrified faces and then back at me, his own face a picture of confusion. "Did I say it wrong, Mommy?" he whispered. A new, strange, and terrible strength flooded through me, washing away the last of my own grief and shame. I stood up. My movements were calm, deliberate. I reached over and gently, lovingly smoothed down my son's hair before helping him down from the chair. "No, sweetie," I whispered, my voice for him alone. "You said it perfectly." I then took his small, warm hand in my own. I looked across the table one last time, at my husband, at his mother, at the ruins of their secret, pathetic little conspiracy. I did not yell, I did not cry, I did not need to. My 8-year-old son had just fought and won a battle for my honor that I had not even known was being waged. "Thank you, Oliver," I said, my voice now clear and strong for the whole room to hear. "You just told Mommy everything she ever needed to know." I looked at the man I had once called my husband, the man who was now a stranger to me. "We're leaving," I said. I walked out of that house, holding my son's hand, leaving behind the entire shattered wreckage of my marriage. My husband and his mother had been planning my quiet, slow, and painful execution. They just didn't realize my son, my little hero, had been listening at the door. And the war they had been planning in secret was now over before it had ever even begun. I walked out of that house, my son Oliver's small, trusting hand held tightly in mine, and I did not look back. The sound of the heavy oak door clicking shut behind us was the most liberating sound I have ever heard. It was the sound of a cage door closing, but with me, for the first time, on the outside. The car ride home was a blur of festive, mocking Christmas lights and a deep, profound, and strangely peaceful silence. Oliver was quiet in his booster seat beside me, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery. I didn't know what to say, how to even begin to explain the monstrous, adult ugliness he had just witnessed, and in his own innocent way, dismantled. He was the one who spoke first. His voice was a small, worried whisper in the quiet car. "Mommy?" he asked. "Is Daddy going to be mad at me?" I pulled the car over to the side of the quiet, suburban road under the gentle glow of a streetlight. I turned and looked at my son, my beautiful, brave, and brilliant 8-year-old boy. I reached over and brushed the hair from his forehead. "No, sweetie," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Daddy is not going to be mad at you. You did nothing wrong. You did the bravest and the best thing you could have possibly done." I took a deep breath. You told the truth. And sometimes the truth makes grown-ups very quiet and very sad for a little while, because it can be a very powerful and very difficult thing to hear. "So, you're not mad at me?" he asked, his lower lip trembling slightly. "Mad at you?" I said, a real, genuine, and watery laugh escaping my lips. "Oh, Oliver, I have never been more proud of you in my entire life. You are my hero. Do you understand that? My absolute hero." He seemed to understand. He gave me a small, relieved smile, and we continued our drive home in a new kind of silence. Not an awkward one, but a comfortable one. The silence of a team. When we got back to our own house, the familiar, cozy space felt different. It was no longer the home I shared with my husband. It was now my fortress, my sanctuary, and I needed to defend it. My first act was one of cold, final precision. I went into our bedroom, opened my husband, Mark's closet, and I packed a bag for him. I didn't do it with anger or with haste. I did it with a strange, detached calm.
I packed his expensive suits, his favorite shirts, his running shoes, the things in the man I no longer knew. I placed the packed suitcase neatly by the front door. My second act was a phone call. Not to my own parents, not to a friend. I called my older brother, a man who lived 1,000 miles away, a man who was a brilliant and notoriously ruthless forensic accountant. I told him everything. He listened in a long, silent fury. When I was finished, he said only 5 words. "Don't let him touch anything. I'm on the first flight in the morning." I was in the kitchen making my son a cup of hot chocolate when I finally heard Mark's car pull into the driveway. It was hours later. I steeled myself. He stormed into the house, his face a mask of thunderous, self-righteous rage. "What the hell was that, Isabel?" he bellowed, throwing his keys onto the counter. "What was that? You let our son, our 8-year-old son, publicly humiliate me? Humiliate my mother in front of our entire family on Christmas Day? Have you lost your mind?" I just looked at him, my expression a perfect, calm blank. "I didn't let him do anything, Mark," I said, my voice quiet, but with no trace of fear. "He told the truth, a truth you and your mother were whispering about in a study, a truth you thought no one else would ever hear." His anger seemed to falter for a second, replaced by a flicker of panic disbelief. He tried to gaslight me, to twist the narrative. "It was just talk," he sputtered. "A hypothetical. My mother was just upset about you losing your job. She gets emotional. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, the expectations." "Oh, I think I understand everything perfectly now. I understand that you were planning to steal our son's future to fund your own selfish escape. I understand that you sat there, in silence, and you let your mother call me a disappointment, knowing full well that you were the one who was actively betraying our entire family." I then pointed with my chin towards the front door. "There's your bag," I said simply. "Get out of my house." The rage vanished, replaced by a pathetic, desperate panic. He looked at the suitcase, then back at me, his face crumbling. "Izzy, no, you can't do this," he pleaded, his voice now a whine. "It's Christmas. I have nowhere to go. I'll lose everything. Please, we can talk about this." I just looked at him, at this weak, pathetic stranger who had been my husband, and I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a vast, empty and liberating indifference. He stood there in the doorway, a broken, defeated man, begging me not to throw him out. He was so terrified of losing his comfortable home, his easy life. He had no idea that I had just spent the last hour on a video call with my brother, the forensic accountant. He had no idea that we had gone through every single one of his and his mother's joint financial statements, and that we had found the secret, offshore account where they had already started hiding his money. He thought he was just losing his home. He had no idea he was about to lose everything else, too. I stood in the doorway of my own home, watching my husband, my partner of 12 years, stumble out into the cold Christmas night, his single, hastily packed suitcase in his hand. The door clicked shut, and the silence he left behind was a profound and deeply liberating thing. My son, Oliver, was now safely asleep in his bed, the unlikely hero of a war he didn't even know he had just won for me. The old Isabel would have collapsed in a heap of tears, but the woman who stood in that hallway was someone new, someone forged in the fires of a public humiliation and a profound betrayal. I was not a victim anymore. I was a woman with a mission. My brother, Ethan, arrived the next morning, his face a mask of grim, protective fury. He was a forensic accountant, a man who lived and breathed in a world of numbers and spreadsheets, a world of logic and cold, hard facts. He was the opposite of our parents' emotional chaos, and he was the exact ally I needed. He hugged me tightly, and then he got straight to work.
My kitchen table, the scene of so many happy family breakfasts that now felt like a lie, became our war room. For the next 2 days, we huddled over laptops, fueled by black coffee and a righteous anger. Ethan, with his quiet, brilliant mind, began to untangle the web of lies my husband and his mother had been weaving for years. "They're clever, I'll give them that," he muttered on the second day, his eyes narrowed in concentration as he stared at a complex financial statement. "But they're arrogant, and arrogance always leaves a trail." The truth he uncovered was far worse and far more calculated than I could have ever imagined. The first discovery was the college fund for our son Oliver. I had always believed it was a joint account, a shared investment in our son's future. Ethan discovered the truth. It was, in fact, a trust, and the sole trustee, the only person with legal control over the funds, was my mother-in-law, Judith. She had set it up years ago as a gift, a generous act that was, in fact, a masterstroke of control. The money was never legally mine or Mark's. It was hers to give or to take away as she saw fit. But it was the second discovery that was the true, devastating blow. Ethan, using his expertise to navigate the labyrinth of our joint finances, found the secret. It was a series of small, almost unnoticeable monthly wire transfers, a few $100s here, 1,000 there, all sent from my husband Mark's personal salary account and from our joint savings to an anonymous, numbered corporation in the Cayman Islands, a classic offshore shell company. The transfers had been happening for years, not just since I had lost my job. They had started the year after we were married.
"This wasn't a recent plan, Isabel," my brother said, his voice quiet, his eyes full of a sad, angry pity. "This wasn't a reaction to you losing your job. This was a long-term, premeditated conspiracy. He has been systematically hiding marital assets from you since the very beginning. Your job loss, that wasn't the cause. That was just going to be his excuse." The betrayal was so profound, so cold, so meticulously planned that it took my breath away. My entire marriage had been a lie, a long con. Armed with this new, irrefutable evidence, I was ready. When Mark's lawyer finally called to schedule a preliminary divorce settlement meeting, I agreed without hesitation. We met in a sterile, impersonal conference room at a neutral law firm. Mark was there, flanked by his mother, Judith, who was clearly there to be his emotional and strategic support. They looked smug, confident. They thought this would be a simple negotiation. They thought I was a heartbroken, unemployed woman with no resources and no power. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Their lawyer started, laying out a paltry, insulting settlement offer. I was to get the bare minimum, a pittance, in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce. I let him finish, then I looked at my own lawyer, who I had hired on my brother's recommendation. She just gave me a small, confident nod. "We reject your offer," she said, her voice a calm, clear instrument of war. She then turned to my husband and his mother, "And we are filing a counterclaim, not just for a fair division of assets, but for punitive damages on the grounds of a decade-long conspiracy to commit financial fraud." Mark and his mother just laughed. "Fraud?" Judith sneered. "Don't be ridiculous. You have no proof of anything." My lawyer just smiled. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick, beautifully organized dossier, the one my brother had prepared. She slid a copy across the table to them. "Exhibit A," she said, "is a detailed analysis of the fraudulent trust fund set up in your name, Judith, using marital assets. And Exhibit B is a complete 24-page forensic trace of every single dollar your son Mark has illegally funneled into his secret offshore shell company for the last 11 years.
I watched as their faces, which had been so full of arrogant confidence, completely and totally crumbled. I watched as my husband's face went white with the terror of a man who has just been caught in an inescapable trap. I watched as my mother-in-law stared at the documents, her eyes wide with the horrified disbelief of a mastermind whose perfect crime had just been unraveled. Their lawyer, a man who clearly had no idea what his clients had been up to, just stared at the papers, his own face a mask of pure professional horror. He immediately stood up. "We need to request a recess," he stammered. Mark looked at me then, across the long, polished table. His eyes were not full of anger anymore. They were full of a new, dawning, and utterly terrifying fear. He had brought a knife to a gunfight, and he had just realized that I was the one holding a bazooka. He and his mother had planned to steal my son's future. They had no idea my quiet, unassuming, and brilliant brother had just given me the power to take both of theirs. The silence in that sterile conference room was a beautiful, terrible thing. It was the sound of a lifetime of arrogance and deceit, finally and completely running out of road. My husband, Mark, and his mother, Judith, just stared at the thick, damning dossier on the table between us, their faces a ghastly uniform shade of white. The complex web of lies they had so carefully woven for over a decade had just been unraveled in less than 5 minutes by my quiet, brilliant brother.
"This wasn't a recent plan, Isabel," my brother said, his voice quiet, his eyes full of a sad, angry pity. "This wasn't a reaction to you losing your job. This was a long-term, premeditated conspiracy. He has been systematically hiding marital assets from you since the very beginning. Your job loss, that wasn't the cause. That was just going to be his excuse." The betrayal was so profound, so cold, so meticulously planned that it took my breath away. My entire marriage had been a lie, a long con. Armed with this new, irrefutable evidence, I was ready. When Mark's lawyer finally called to schedule a preliminary divorce settlement meeting, I agreed without hesitation. We met in a sterile, impersonal conference room at a neutral law firm. Mark was there, flanked by his mother, Judith, who was clearly there to be his emotional and strategic support. They looked smug, confident. They thought this would be a simple negotiation. They thought I was a heartbroken, unemployed woman with no resources and no power. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Their lawyers started, laying out a paltry, insulting settlement offer. I was to get the bare minimum, a pittance, in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce. I let him finish. Then I looked at my own lawyer, who I had hired on my brother's recommendation. She just gave me a small, confident nod. "We reject your offer," she said, her voice a calm, clear instrument of war. She then turned to my husband and his mother, "And we are filing a counterclaim, not just for a fair division of assets, but for punitive damages, on the grounds of a decade-long conspiracy to commit financial fraud." Mark and his mother just laughed. "Fraud?" Judith sneered. "Don't be ridiculous. You have no proof of anything." My lawyer just smiled. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick, beautifully organized dossier, the one my brother had prepared. She slid a copy across the table to them. "Exhibit A," she said, "is a detailed analysis of the fraudulent trust funds set up in your name, Judith, using marital assets. And Exhibit B," she continued, "is a complete 24-page forensic trace of every single dollar your son, Mark, has illegally funneled into his secret offshore shell company for the last 11 years. I watched as their faces, which had been so full of arrogant confidence, completely and totally crumbled. I watched as my husband's face went white with the terror of a man who has just been caught in an escapable trap. I watched as my mother-in-law stared at the documents, her eyes wide with the horrified disbelief of a mastermind whose perfect crime had just been unraveled. Their lawyer, a man who clearly had no idea what his clients had been up to, just stared at the papers, his own face a mask of pure professional horror. He immediately stood up. "We need to request a recess," he stammered. Mark looked at me then, across the long polished table. His eyes were not full of anger anymore. They were full of a new, dawning, and utterly terrifying fear. He had brought a knife to a gunfight, and he had just realized that I was the one holding a bazooka. He and his mother had planned to steal my son's future. They had no idea my quiet, unassuming, and brilliant brother had just given me the power to take both of theirs. The silence in that sterile conference room was a beautiful, terrible thing. It was the sound of a lifetime of arrogance and deceit finally and completely running out of road. My husband, Mark, and his mother, Judith, just stared at the thick, damning dossier on the table between us, their faces a ghastly, uniform shade of white. The complex web of lies they had so carefully woven for over a decade had just been unraveled in less than 5 minutes by my quiet, brilliant brother. I think about that day often. I think about my mother-in-law's cruel toast and my husband's silent complicity. I realize now that their greatest crime was not the financial fraud. It was their attempt to make me feel worthless, to make me believe I was a disappointment. But their plan had backfired in the most spectacular way. My little boy, who had seen his mother in pain, and who, with a child's pure, simple, and unwavering sense of justice, had refused to stay silent. He had spoken the truth, not knowing the power his words contained. He had not just saved me from a future of betrayal, he had saved himself. He had been the hero of his own story, and I was just the lucky woman who got to be his mother. An absolutely incredible story of a mother's humiliation and the son who, in his innocence, became her greatest champion. What do you think of the way Oliver exposed the secret? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were cheering for this amazing mother-son team, please show your support by hitting that like button. And be sure to subscribe for more powerful stories of karma and justice. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.